You're tuned in to another one of the Final Takeaways podcast edition. We're on episode 28. Thank you for joining us. Let's get right to it.
Never stop, I'll get it if I want it. Gotta make to myself a promise. I won't quit, keep going till I got it. I won't give up.
Domestic violence continues to be a chronic sore point in Guyana, especially domestic violence against women and girls. It's been that way for probably a century or even longer. If you grew up in Guyana or still live there, you understand this all too well. Instead of getting better, the problem appears to be growing worse, even with laws in place to protect vulnerable individuals and actual victims after they've sought help from the police and the courts, such as when the abuser is thrown into jail or the court grants the victim a protective order against the perpetrator, which is essentially a document that orders them to stay away from you or stop making contact with you through various means. But protection orders are often given a bad rap for just being a, quote, piece of paper with no real power behind it. This week, Police Superintendent Shalon Daniels was quoted as saying that a protection order granted by the court to a victim of domestic violence is not just a piece of paper, but a document that has strong legal authority to keep abusers away. While speaking at a forum this week, Daniels said the police are authorized to take action against abusers who violate the order and bring them to justice. Is that right? In Guyana, many people strongly disagree. To quote the policewoman word for word, it is a paper that is signed by a judge or a magistrate with full authority to give the police the right to enter the premises where the perpetrator might have forced themselves upon while this order is in force, and take evasive action to have this matter dealt with. Contextually speaking, what she's saying is that the police has the right to enter wherever that perpetrator is who violated the protection order and deal with that individual as the law sees fit, whether it's to rearrest the person or whatever they determine is the right and proper thing to do at that point. But it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop there. And even if the police arrest or rearrest the individual, then what? What's next? Are they going to keep doing that? Is there any other stronger or stringent remedy for the victim? Now, all of this sounds amazing on paper, but in practice, things could look different. At its core, a protective order is a court mandate. It tells one person, usually the alleged abuser, that they must not contact, harass, or come near the protected person. A protective order is meant to deter violence or harassment by creating clear legal consequences if the abuser breaks the rules as set out in the protective order document. The order creates a paper shield, giving the victim something tangible to present to the police or the courts. Common provisions or rules against the abuser include barring them from making physical contact with the victim. Also, they are typically barred from making phone calls, texts, emails, or social media communication. The abuser must stay away from the victim's home, work, or school. In some cases, abusers may be required to surrender their firearm. As for the order itself, it can be temporary, often lasting a few weeks until a hearing, or it can be long-term, where it is intended to last for months or even years. I know someone who was given a protective order that lasted 2 years, but that was in the United States, and that order was called a permanent protective order because of the length of time it was meant to exist. So, in legal theory, the protective order acts as a boundary backed by the state's authority, by the country's authority, the court's authority. If it's broken, the abuser potentially faces arrest or prosecution. By all means, if the law is enforced, that could be the next step. But the police, along with the court and the entire legal system, the justice system, has to take steps to enforce the order, which of course starts with the victim or alleged victim making a police report whenever they believe or perceive the abuser has breached the protection order. Again, all of it sounds good on paper, but in practice, we see something else far more telling and even dangerous. What the police force and the court system need to acknowledge and address is this, and we're talking about the police force and the court system in Guyana. They must acknowledge and address the fact that victims are usually at a higher risk of violence, retaliatory violence, and escalated violence, stalking or harassment after they report their abuser to the police. Statistics show that victims may end up getting hurt far worse than before, or even lose their lives, or be at risk of losing their lives. Not only that, perpetrators may up the ante and target the victim's children or other family members. Tell me, which victim of violence do you think or know that wants to put themselves and their family members at risk this way? It's like a catch-22 situation, a conundrum, a dilemma. For real, for real, for real. The struggle is real for victims out here. It's like being stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea, not knowing whether to report to the police to enhance the protection order or be silent and risk further abuse. Today, we'll do a deeper dive into this really important but often misunderstood topic about protection orders, which are sometimes called restraining orders, stay away orders, or orders of protection depending on the jurisdiction or the country that you live in. But in this case, we're talking about Guyana, which calls it a protection order. These court-issued documents are supposed to create a legal barrier between a victim and their abuser. But how well do they actually work in cases of domestic violence or intimate partner abuse? We'll tell you what a protective order is designed to do, and we pretty much have done so already. What's required for it to actually work, the limitations of protective orders in real life, and then we'll tell you as we go along some of the unseen consequences for victims when they report breaches of the order. And you might be asking, what does this have to do with anything? Why is this important? Well, a subject like this will be important to someone who is either a victim of violence or at risk of being a victim of violence, or has a protective order and wants to know how it works, want to gain a better understanding of how it protects them and what they need to do and what are some of the risks involved. Or they may know someone who is a victim and they can, learn something and pass that information on to that individual, whether it's a loved one, a friend, or a family member. Again, like I said, if you or someone you love is or was involved in an abusive relationship or has been the unfortunate victim of domestic or intimate partner violence, then this topic may hit close to home. But I have to warn you that the discussion around it can cause unsettling feelings to resurface, feelings associated with the emotional and physical trauma linked to abuse. And worse yet, if you live in Guyana and feel like you literally have no way out, you may want to hear this. Guyana is one of the countries with a cultural view of women as lesser. In other words, it seems as if women's equality and protection are simply dismissed as not important in what still appears to be a patriarchal society. The women of this country are usually treated less than their male counterparts, not only at home, in the workplace, in their places of worship, and in their wider communities. So when Police Superintendent Shalon Daniels, in her grand statements, encourages domestic violence victims, women and men who were granted a protection order against their abuser, to report their abuser to the police station if the abuser violates the directions set out in that order, it causes critical thinkers to question the practicality of her statements. To some, it sounds meaningless. By and large, domestic abusers go unchecked by law enforcement in Guyana, even after multiple reports, even when victims are visibly wounded. We're not making this up. We are not making this up. Do you think law enforcement is coming to the rescue of these victims after hearing their abusers failed to honor the contents of the protection order, like calling or texting or making any other form of unwanted contact or contact that's restricted by the court? Come on now, give me a break. By and large, the police are not going to take it seriously. And I dare you to show me proof that I'm wrong. Statistically speaking, the police ain't gonna go look for nobody. They're letting people accused of homicide and attempted homicide walk free, even when there's CCTV footage of their involvement in some way or the other. Do you think they're hunting for an abuser who is a male in a very patriarchal society? Okay. In theory, a protection order sounds like a great solution in the moment. In practice, it really isn't. You've heard it said. It's just a, quote, piece of paper. While it is vigorously enforced in countries like the United States, in countries like Guyana, the euphemism "it is, quote, just a piece of paper" is all too real. In other words, a protective order granted to victims in Guyana is usually seen as meaningless or lacks true authority without accompanying actions by law enforcement, the courts, and the justice system as a whole. Protective orders or even jail time don't change the abuser or stop the abuse. If anything, the abuser may go on to target a new individual, turning them into another victim. You see, abusers are dealing with their own demons, so to speak. In other words, people abuse others because they are dealing with internal issues ranging from chronic anger to chronic stress, or even substance abuse such as drug or alcohol abuse. For other abusers, they are just carrying on the cycle of abuse they endured as a child. Therefore, what's needed in addition to and more than a protection order are systems and programs to help rehabilitate violent perpetrators. For example, the court can order them to attend an anger management program for a specified period of time. For substance abusers, it may be an order to attend a substance abuse treatment center or rehab. I know you're going to say those facilities or programs are not available in Guyana, or they are but are not functional. Either way, that amplifies the reason why we're having this conversation about the lack of authority protection orders have when it comes to actually protecting victims of violence in Guyana. What are your thoughts and ideas on this matter so far? Let's talk about what's needed. Here's the catch. A protective order is only as effective as the system that enforces it. Several things must align. The order must be clear and specific so there's no gray area the abuser can exploit. There also must be swift action by law enforcement. Police must respond quickly when a victim reports a violation. Courts must be willing to treat breaches seriously. Then there's the factor of victim safety planning. A protective order is strongest when paired with a safety plan, a plan that includes secure housing, support networks, and sometimes relocation. Next up is accountability for the abuser. Consequences for violating the order must be certain and significant enough to deter further abuse. And last but not least, community support. Guyana is a highly judgmental society where people live and thrive to tear down each other. Women versus women, women against women. I have seen it over and over again, how women, instead of uniting, are divided against each other for whatever reason. You see it on social media every single day. It's as if they thrive on the pain of others. So yes, community support can be a tough thing when you're living in Guyana. Nonetheless, a victim needs friends, family, and advocates to be there for them and help them reinforce the boundaries and provide backup when the victim feels isolated. In fact, attacking the victim or judging the victim or laying the blame on the victim for the abuse further isolates the victim. To wrap up, in theory, if all these parts function together, the protective order should help create a safer environment. And in that sense, it wouldn't be just a piece of paper. It would have that legal authority it is intended to have. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. Protective orders are not bulletproof. They do not physically stop abuse. For example, a piece of paper cannot physically stop an abuser from showing up at someone's door, at the victim's door. Therefore, the victim is still vulnerable, especially if law enforcement is slow to respond. A protection order is also dependent on the abuser's compliance. They have to comply with it. If the abuser doesn't respect the law, the order has limited real-time power. Then there's the issue of enforcement gaps. Police may treat violations as quote-unquote minor or not prioritize them. Some victims report waiting for hours or for days for action to be taken, for the police to take action. Then there's the issue of system bias and overload. Courts may be overwhelmed. Judges may doubt victims' credibility, especially without physical evidence of abuse or breach of the protection order. And overall, a protective order, which is a piece of paper, often creates a false sense of security. If you are a victim, the last thing you want to do is to think that this piece of paper, that this court document is the be-all and end-all of everything, that you can go about your business and let your guard down. In fact, I think your guards should be higher up because, again, of retaliatory violence. Sometimes abusers grow livid, super angry after the victim comes to the court to seek relief, and if it led to their arrest, things can get uglier by the moment. So no, a protection order you should not allow it to create that false sense of security. You always have to be on alert. You have to be on your P's and Q's, especially after you go to the court or you go to the police to report the abuser. Things can escalate from that point, worse than you ever thought before. Anyways, this is our final takeaway. A protective order reduces risks but does not eliminate them. We truly hope you learned something today, especially if you are a victim of domestic violence or you know someone who is a victim. We want you to know that you have the right to live free of violence. It is a human right and it's protected under the Constitution of Guyana in addition to the provisions in the criminal laws. Also, we want you to know that staying silent may not stop the abuse. It doesn't really, honestly. You may call your local domestic violence hotline number, but only if it is safe to do so. A domestic professional can provide tips and guidance on helping you and your family stay safe. We truly and sincerely wish you the best outcome. Here's what's coming up next.